role-playing games. This genre of games is often defined by a few key elements: worlds packed with adventure, a variety of ways to approach every situation, strong narratives and stories, and of course, arguably chief among these is progression for both the character and the player. Character progression in games can take on a lot of different forms, from the classic level up to upgrading your equipment to discovering new dangerous locations that will wipe the floor with you if you aren't prepared. In addition to all these forms of progression, there's another element present in many RPGs and RPG-style games that complements them: the skill tree. Skills, perks, abilities, whatever a game calls it, these are usually given as another layer of character customization that aims to enhance the feeling of progress, a sort of proof that your character is adapting to the world they live in, proof that your character is improving their skills to better respond to the situations that they frequently encounter. These skill trees are often split up into categories, so characters can specialize in a specific area or type of skills. You might see a holy trinity split, such as DPS, support, and tank, or they'll be broken down by playstyles like melee, ranged, and utility. As you progress down each tree, you'll see the perks become more and more enticing, and individual perks that can change your entire playstyle dramatically. These exciting perks incentivize you to commit more heavily to a select few skill trees. After all, it makes sense that as you continue to hone a skill, more techniques become within your and your character's grasp to learn and execute. And then there's Skyrim. And here you go, you got so good at swinging a big weapon around that you can now occasionally paralyze your foes if you swing your weapon a specific way. You're so good at magic, you can spend less magicka to cast some spells. Wow, look at that thief, he's so good at stealing, he can take people's clothes off. Is it funny? Absolutely. But does it contribute to the true class fantasy of being a subtle infiltrator who gets in and gets out before anyone notices who's dead or what's gone? Now, I feel that an explanation of the idea of class fantasy is warranted. Class fantasy is a concept that, when building a new character in any game, you have some idea of what you want your character to look like or play like by the middle or end of the playthrough. Skill trees that enable you to realize amazing class fantasies are the ones where you can feel the weight of each decision and investment into that character paying off with each action you take. Every swing of a warrior's weapon, every foe a mage subdues without even needing to fight them, every silent kill an assassin delivers to unsuspecting enemies. All of these are the result of thoughtfully creating your character to be unique in how they approach any situation. Skyrim only seems to get glimpses of class fantasy in its perk trees, but doesn't really help in fully realizing them. Let's look at this idea of class fantasy through the lens of Skyrim's mages, specifically in the Destruction perk tree. Playing as a pyromancer, a cryomancer, or an electromancer doesn't really change your playstyle much, or give you any reason to really dedicate yourself to one of the main spell elements. All but 3 perks in the vanilla tree are generic and apply to all destruction spells, or are dedicated to just increasing the damage of an element. The 3 perks that do differentiate these spell elements: Fire causes fear, Frost causes paralysis, and Shock causes enemies to disintegrate. Admittedly, 2 of these are kind of cool. Frost paralyzing lends itself to the crowd control effect of ice spells seen in many games. Shock disintegrating your foes can definitely make you feel like a Sith Lord the first few times it happens. I don't love how Fire's special perk just makes the enemy run away, like, I was trying to hit you with my spells, please stand still, now I have to chase you down. And another annoyance with all these element-defining perks, they only proc when the enemy is low on health, like really low, 10% or less health low. You know, when you're about to kill them anyway. Once again, the biggest flaw with all of this is that none of the perks in the vanilla destruction perk tree make you feel like the embodiment of your chosen element. Now let's see how Ordinator handles these mage archetypes. Pyromancers are unstoppable engines of destruction once they get going. They focus on spreading their flames quickly and causing mayhem through damage over time effects and zone control. The Pyromancer may take a few spellcasts to get going, but by the time they're done, the battlefield they leave behind is alight with smoke, flames, and the ashes of those who dared stand in their way. Cryomancers challenge enemies to just try and get close to them. Their perks make them masters of crowd control, with ways to keep enemies at range while assailing them with freezing spells and decimating their armor and frost resistance. Frost struggled to be a viable option in vanilla Skyrim due to the prevalence of Nords with their frost resistance, along with many other frost-resistant enemies. With Ordinator, Cryomancers teach the inhabitants of the harshest climate in Tamriel what the true meaning of cold is. Electromancers are like masters of pure, unpredictable arcane magic, and require a good tempo of spellcasts and timing to play well. They gain major damage bursts from their Nova Charge and Stormblast procs, which heavily increase their damage output. While managing these burst intervals, they can control the pace of the battle and toy with opponents by levitating them with magnetism and causing convulsions from the shocks. Master Electromancers can even pick out priority targets from afar and pull them in close, leaving them at the Electromancer's mercy. In addition to all of this, there are perks that further influence how you build and play your mage. Robes of the Magi encourages you to remain unarmored, granting a massive damage boost to mages who wear only robes and no armor. Force of Nature empowers spell elements in their favorable weather conditions, frost spells in snow, fire in sunlight, and shock in the rain. We can even see a perk with a drawback in Elemental Specialization, where you can choose to boost one spell element's power in exchange for decreasing the power of the other two elements, further rewarding your dedication to choosing one element of expertise. Now, please don't get me wrong. I adore Skyrim, and I think its basic perk trees likely help players new to RPGs have one less thing to worry about when playing their character. Once you picked a playstyle you liked, most perks you could take wouldn't force you to change up your playstyle in a substantial way. Maybe warriors specializing in two-handed weapons will use backwards power attacks more often to inflict paralysis on enemies with the perk War Master. Or mages may go from having to drink a magicka potion to finish off a foe to not needing one anymore. But aside from fights being pulled backwards more often and having more potions in your inventory, what do you change once achieving those perks? There's no tangible sense that your character is adapting to their experiences as they live. They now hit a little bit harder or cast spells a little bit longer. With Ordinator, however, the perk trees are fleshed out to dramatically expand on the feeling of character growth with every perk you take. The trees keep the important, practical pieces of the vanilla trees and streamline the rest. Instead of spending 5 hard-earned perk points on 5 mastery perks just to increase your base effectiveness with an ability, there are now just 2. Instead of gaining strict bonuses from every perk, you can now choose some double-edged sword perks that give strong benefits and have their drawbacks, making you really think about how dedicated you are to a skill tree, instead of just picking the next one because you need it to get to the next one. Some of Ordinator's perks are even based around your character adapting to and exploring the world around them. Looking for wild shrines to bolster your proficiency as a mage. Finding new bone altars to conjure a skeleton army from as a necromancer. Wandering the world to prove your expertise as a warrior by fighting difficult battles. You may even have an actual stroke of luck as a thief by stumbling across a dragon of fate that's worth a fortune. Looking at the vanilla Skyrim perk trees, there isn't a single perk that externally changes how your character approaches the game's world as a whole. Another way to put this is that the vanilla perk trees make your character grow in efficiency, but lack that feeling of growing in genuine mastery. With the vanilla perk system, a player dedicated to the two-handed weapon tree and a novice two-handed weapon user may perform some movements differently, but will ultimately do the same damage given similar gear and perk allocation. With Ordinator, you as a player can become more skilled at using a specific tree by learning the in and out interactions between perks and game mechanics. Ordinator lends itself to a much deeper experience when really trying to build and roleplay a class. You can connect with your character in a more personal way, because it's not just them getting stronger when they level up, it's both of you. Now, where Ordinator truly shines the brightest is on the expert and higher difficulties of the game. To all of you who have played Skyrim on Legendary before, I am so sorry. To those of you who haven't, here's a basic overview of the Legendary difficulty Skyrim experience.
And I say, hey, it's just an ordinary day, and it's all your state of mind. At the end of the day, you just got to say it's alright.
These harder difficulties tend to impede on the base game's build diversity, as the massively reduced damage you deal and the insanely high damage you take funnels you towards a very War of Attrition playstyle, chipping away at enemy HP bars while losing as little of your health as possible. At Legendary difficulty, you are dealing 1/4 of your damage, while enemies are dealing 3 times their damage to you. It's about as much fun as it sounds. While there is still some build diversity at this difficulty, you can see Fevy's videos for some awesome builds and great examples, early gameplay often boils down to avoiding interactions entirely rather than facing them with the tools at your disposal until the build really takes off at the later levels, usually around level 30 or so. Ordinator was, in the mod author's words, built with higher difficulty in mind and aims to make it so there are far more interesting, viable builds right from the start. You don't have to get 20 levels into your pure mage on Legendary and realize maybe this wasn't a great idea. Though you could probably realize this around level 1. I mentioned earlier that the simplicity of Skyrim's base perk trees was a way to enhance the game's accessibility. RPGs were still somewhat thought of as number-crunching nerd games to an extent back in the late 2000s when Skyrim began development. Reducing the burden on the player to use their build correctly likely contributed to the game's initial success. But once most people put the game down and moved on, players like me who continued to play it for the next decade wanted more out of Skyrim. Ordinator, at least for me, was exactly that. An evolution on the game's established core that brought a slew of endless possibilities and theory crafting to my mind. To me, it felt like this is what Skyrim was meant to feel like, playing as a uniquely gifted and powerful Dragonborn whose feats were not just fantastic, but superhuman. Ordinator is a fantastic mod that completely revitalizes the entirety of Skyrim by breathing life back into how you and your character approach the game's world. If I had to choose one mod to play Skyrim with for the rest of time, it would absolutely be this. The sheer replay value that this mod brings to the table is astonishing, to say the least. No other mod for Skyrim has continually made me this excited to return to a game that is now over a decade old. So thank you, Ordinator, and thank you, EnaiSiaion, for creating this masterpiece of a mod. Hey! If you made it this far in the video, I just want to say thank you so much. I am not sure what possessed me to create a video, or is this a love letter, about one single mod from one single game, but here we are. I've put a link in the description to download Ordinator from Nexus Mods if you're interested in trying it for yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and leave a comment about some of your favorite Skyrim playthroughs you've had, or tell me what builds, modded or unmodded, you've played in Skyrim. If you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, as I'll be here continuing to create content about games. For the foreseeable future, I have a plethora of video ideas that I'm considering to do next. Until then, get out there and make some wild character builds that make you excited to head off on your next adventure in Skyrim.